We want to make a very, very simple React Redux application where it'll have a Google Maps integration, and basically you can, when you load the map, it'll show basically a garage sale, like whatever items are for sale in that vicinity, and you're able to add your own item for sale, and then you can say, I want to buy this, and it'll send a text message to the seller, etc. Hopefully we'll get through all that by Sunday. I think based on the room, I think that's a pretty realistic goal. And then it'll all be React Redux, and that's it. We're going to start out with static data, set everything up sort of visually, get everything working from a static standpoint, and then that'll be pretty much the first half of today. Convert that over to React, then hook up to a backend, and then get all the SDKs built in. Certainly Twilio, because it's easy. That'll take care of the SMS. And then hopefully, if there's time, Stripe for payments. I don't know if that's an important feature for you guys, though. But if there's time, we'll get that built in. And obviously, some sort of email integration, probably SendGrid. So to start, open your terminal. And we need to install a couple packages. So start with gulp. Let's go ahead and install that, just like that, unless you already have it.
I'm going to move to the corner.
Okay, next we're going to need Webpack. These are pretty standard JavaScript build tools, so again, you might already have this.
Yeah, I just want to make sure you're installing them globally, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Okay, last but not least, install the Turbo CLI. Everyone will need to do this because this is my CLI. We're going to use that for a scaffolding engine, so we don't have to build everything from the bottom up. So we can sort of get right into the business logic. You gonna do that first?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, a couple tools and that's it, we're good to go. Head over to wherever you do your project workspace. I'm just gonna do all this on the desktop. And we're gonna scaffold the project using the Turbo CLI with the React flag. So Turbo has a couple scaffolding options. React is one of them, which gives you a React and Redux environment. So it's kind of like create React app with a little bit more stuff. So Turbo, new, let's call it garage sale. And then -- React for the React flag. Okay, everyone see that?
Okay, quickly, I'm already a little behind. First, we install gulp. After gulp,
Webpack.
Webpack. And then the CLI. Right?
Turbo-CLI, correct. Stay here and help out people that stuff. Okay, let's create our first project using the React flag. So Turbo new garage sale -- React. This being the React option, scaffold option. So are we all together? It's cool that you guys work at the Garden. After programming, NBA fantasy is my obsession.
Yeah.
So I live on the waiver wire in NBA fantasy.
So I bet a lot of the next players are probably getting picked up.
Well, KP's gone. He's like a top
Yeah.
5 pick now. And
Right.
then I have my eye on that rookie, Frank, whatever.
Nicotine.
Yeah, because he looks like he might start picking up on assists. I don't think he'll ever be a big scorer, but I think he can average 6.5 assists.
Yeah.
That was a lot of blocks.
Was Hardaway Jr. like a big pick in the beginning? or-
No, because he's kind of in my opinion, he's kind of a lazy guy. Like he's overrated,
Yeah.
and he's going to try and prove his worth in the contract, but he doesn't have the work commitment. Like he'll be good for like 3 months,
Got it.
and then he'll just crap out. He's already crapping out now. He
Yeah, he's
left
up
early in
and
the
down.
game. This will all be on YouTube, so I can't wait until Tim Hardaway Jr. wants to learn programming and fish the cell.
Did you get like an error or something?
Issues installed intervals.
You need sudo npm i-g.
I should ask you for your password.
It did. So let me install my SIG turbo CLI, right?
Okay, so here's the command for creating a new project with the React scaffold. So go ahead and run that through. I'll do it right now. That'll create the project right here, wherever you are. And then that's a regular Node Express project. It's very conventional Node Express. It's a simplified Node Express project with a React Redux built in. Okay, so judging by that structure, you want to do what you normally do in a Node Express environment, npm install the packages. So cd into the project, and then run the npm install. And that normally takes about a minute to install all the packages. So while that's going, open up the project in your text editor. So while that's running the install, I'll just take you through the environment. So the React Redux code resides here in this src directory. And that's a full React Redux environment. Okay? The index.js is where your React code begins. And a lot of this code is pre-scaffolded. I'll explain all the mechanics as we go through it. But it's a fully functional React Redux project is the main point. The entry point of the project is inside the views directory in the index.mustache file. Mustache is the templating engine we use as our default. So if you look at the index.mustache, you'll see what appears to be a pretty standard React entry point. You have your root and then your app bundles for React on the bottom. And then on top are just some basic jQuery, JavaScript, usual imports that you would expect. Okay, so this is the structure. Like I said, very conventional Node Express. I'm not doing anything fancy here. I'm using all the standard tools and very, very conventional architecture. Okay, so if you have Node Express experience, this should be pretty comfortable to you in terms of directory structure and organization. Okay. So our project should be almost done installing. Let's go ahead and set up the project on our account. So I'm going to log in. You're probably already logged in, so let me just do that right now. So over here to the right where it says create app, that's where we create our app, obviously. So we want to call it garage sale. So go ahead and put that in, press the create button. Okay, everyone with me right here?
It has to be the same name as the
No, it doesn't have to be. It just makes it easier to organize.
Yeah.
Okay, so right here, everyone make sure you have that. Go ahead and click on that. And it should pop you over to this screen right here. Basically an admin dashboard for the project. This will give us our hosting environment on Turbo. Okay,
What's Vertex and Vector?
Good question. I'll get to that later. But Vertex, I'll explain Vertex. Vertex is the primary hosting environment. It's kind of like Turbo's version of Heroku.
Okay.
Not kind of, but like it's essentially the same thing.
Yeah.
Vector, I'll get to later, probably the end of Sunday. Vector is a Turbo-specific concept that I'm pretty excited about. It's basically a quick way to create, deploy serverless functions that are not attached to web projects. So if you create a very useful vector, I can then use it and vice versa. So, but for now, that's down the road. What we really need is this guy right here, the app ID. So go ahead and copy that. Okay, just go ahead and grab that and copy it. And by now your installs should be done. So go back to your terminal and let's connect our ID by doing turbo app and then paste in the ID number.
So you copy the app. We're trying to copy the app ID, right?
You can just double click on the input, it should copy. This connects your local source code to your Turbo project on the remote, which will enable us to deploy. Okay, very simple. All right, so make sure you have that and just run it through. That's it. Okay. So now let's run the dev server, turbo dev server, just to make sure everything works locally. So this is how you run the dev server. Okay, which is just node mon on localhost 3000. Again, very conventional stuff. And then head over to localhost 3000 and make sure you see this. Okay, that's the scaffolded project. Again, this is React Redux. So these are just very, very simple components wrapped in a React Redux architecture. Okay, so make sure you see that. Okay, good. Krishna, you all good?
I just need,
Travis, you good to go?
Yeah.
Okay. And then last but not least, we're going to deploy it real quick to make sure our deployment environment works. Once we confirm that, we now know that everything works and we can proceed our development. Okay. So go back to your terminal, shut off the dev server, and then to deploy this to our staging environment, we just do turbo deploy.
Please log into.
It says please log in.
Yeah, log into with the account you created on Turbo. Same username, password. And then rerun the turbo deploy command, and it should send everything up to your staging environment. And then we can confirm that everything works locally and on remote, and we're good to go. Oh, turbo login is the command, excuse
Yeah,
me.
it says it right there.
Yeah, so-
This is still running everything locally though, right? It's
Sorry?
not like this isn't setting up like a virtual environment in Turbo. We're still running the site locally, right?
I'm not sure I understand.
Like, just keep going. Never mind. I just like this is local. Oh, so this is still running. Yeah, that's okay.
It's just when you deploy it to the.
I was just wondering if this is like setting up like some type of hosting environment here or something.
No. I wouldn't use your computer as a server. That's
Okay, cool.
quite rude.
All right.
No, you're sending it up to my Turbo platform, which is
Okay, I see.
basically just an AWS abstraction.
I got it.
So-
I am with them with the post. And now I'm trying to get
So once you log in and try Turbo deploy again, it should send all your source code up to your Turbo staging environment. When all that's done, you should see a staging link right here.
Well, it should have been selected locally the first time. So this is the same. We only have one garage sale file. You can go to another one.
I guess this is like the MAMP homepage screen kind of where you can do stuff, and then this is like my actual local site here.
Yeah, so if you go to the staging URL,
Yeah.
you'll see, hopefully you'll see your project like as you see it locally.
Okay.
And this is on the internet, like this is a live.
Yeah. It's a staging site.
Yeah.
So you can show it to somebody else.
Correct. And then you can hook it up to a DNS, put your own website on top of it.
Cool.
So for example, this right here is a website on Turbo right now.
Right, I just switched
Cool.
the.
So it's just it's a website, just a regular website.
So why don't you just create it again? And then
The mechanics behind Turbo hosting, if you're curious, is all AWS Lambda. So I built the entire platform on AWS Lambda.
Okay.
So when you deploy your projects to Turbo,
Yeah.
you're creating a series of Lambdas that run your website.
Got
And
it.
that's how it works.
Okay.
So.
Cool.
so now you're.
Okay, so here's my project on staging, which obviously looks the same as local. That means everything works. So our environment is properly configured locally and on the remote. So now we can begin our programming. So here's my local. So again, just to recap, all the React code is inside this SRC directory. The index.js is the entry point. That's where the React code begins. And most of the other stuff is actually Redux code, which we'll get to hopefully this afternoon. And the components are where the actual components show up on the React side. So like I said, what we're going to make is a very simple sort of yard sale style application where you can navigate a map and see what's for sale in those regions. On the right side, it's going to be like a static left side. So if you look at the Turbo dashboard, or Slack even, you see how the left side is static while the right side moves?
Yeah.
So in our project, it's going to be the left side is the map, the Google Maps, and the right side will be the items for sale. Okay, very simple. Good way to get some React Redux practice to understand how all the pieces work together. Okay, we are going to use a theme. Specifically, we're going to use this theme right here. Okay, I will put it on Slack, but I also recommend that you
So we use for revenge.
Oh, yeah?
Nice. Tim.
Oh, Creative Tim, yeah. So I was going to plug that because it's a good site. So I'll put it on Slack so you can download it. But this is where I got it. So it's, you should check out the site. I don't want to jack anyone's content. I'm not here to do that. So here, I'm going to put this on Slack right now. And if you were watching this video on YouTube, go to Creative Tim, and we are downloading the paper theme, which is one of the free ones, right here. So this one right here, which is free. Okay. So, but you guys, I'll just put it on Slack right now. Okay. So go ahead and download that. Unzip that. We're going to throw that into our project, get some quick UI set up. As a regular HTML, CSS project, or basically a standard Node Express app, and then we're going to proceed to convert that into React components. I find that's a good way to get your head around how React relates to just an actual regular website. Okay, let's go ahead and do that right now. So unzip those files. And you should be looking at this. Do you guys see that?
Yes.
Good. Okay. Open that up. And this assets directory. Yeah, Forrest, what's up?
Oh, I haven't seen the thing on my Snapchat.
Oops. Sorry.
Okay. Inside the garage sale project, which is on the right side, the public directory is where we store all of our static assets. That's JavaScript, CSS, images, they all go here. Okay? So in the theme, that's underneath the assets directory. This is going to just be a one-to-one swap. So take that assets directory and rename it to public. Public. Okay, we're just taking the assets from one and putting it into the other. That's all we're doing. All right, so let's go ahead and do that right now. So grab this folder and just dump it into here. And now we have all the assets from the theme. Now we're going to start moving some pages over. Okay, but before I do that, just to make sure we're all together. So Forrest, you good to go?
So just rename the thing public, right?
No, not the whole thing. Go inside. Assets you can read.
Okay, so now we have all the CSS, JavaScript, that's all in there.
Right.
So now let's take the dashboard HTML and let's move that guy over next. So open this up in Sublime.
Wait a second, where you?
Okay, so here's all the HTML for the home page, so dashboard.html.
We just put it in the public directory?
I'm sorry?
Or do we put it in the public directory first?
No, we're not moving
Oh,
this
just
guy.
open it where it is.
Yeah, we're just gonna this guy we're not moving. We're copying and pasting.
All right.
So highlight the entire contents
Okay.
and just copy it, and that will become our index.mustache because that's our entry point.
Wait, so real quick.
Yep. So here's
we
the
renamed the folder public, and we're just overriding the public folder
in the project in our
Okay.
project. Correct. So that should be done. So that's over.
Cool.
Like that's confirmed. Now the dashboard HTML over here from the theme, we're not going to move that. We're going to copy and paste it. Okay, so open up the dashboard HTML inside the Sublime or whatever text editor you use.
Okay, so
Okay.
you renamed assets public, right?
And then highlight the entire thing and copy it.
Did you do that?
I'm sorry, I'm gonna ask about that. So the public from the paper dashboard, you just drop it into the garage sale.
Right, and you should overwrite.
Got it.
It'll say like, do you want to overwrite this?
Oh.
You should do that.
Alright, so you want to go back to the theme that you just downloaded.
And we need the
So
dashboard.
you're
or
gonna,
it's-
you're gonna drag that one into your project folder.
So dashboard HTML.
It is,
No, just have two separate windows.
Just copy all the contents, just the whole thing. Just copy it. And then inside your garage sale project in Sublime,
So,
that will become our new homepage, right? So that's index.mustache. Inside the views directory, this is our current homepage.
where did-
All this guy has to go, and then just dump in our dashboard HTML. We're just moving it over.
The index.mustache, right?
No, it's
One more
gonna
time?
be-
Into the index.mustache.
Correct.
Right, the whole thing.
Yeah, there we go.
Okay, this won't work quite yet. There's one more adjustment we got to make, but we're almost there. So let me know when you guys have this.
Replace the public. You're replacing the public in your garage
Correct.
sale. Okay, now go back to your product.
And just to show you how it would look now, basically all the assets won't be properly configured. If I do turbo dev server, it's going to look terrible.
Yeah, the links are.
The file paths are off. So we'll fix that right now. So remember, in our project, the assets directory does not exist. So we got to remove all those references. And by default, the public directory is your static asset directory. So we don't even need the public prefix. We don't need that. So we just do Command Option F. And everywhere where it says assets, slash, just replace it with a slash like that. Okay, and then replace all. This will correct our file path references for the static assets. And do a replace all right here. Okay?
Interesting. So yeah, public just gets skipped automatically.
Correct. That's done through the Express scaffold. So if you scaffold a project through Express, part of the configuration is what static folder do you want to use as the default. Typically public is the default. Or sometimes
that's
it's,
kind of how like a server works. The public directory gets skipped a lot.
Yeah,
Like, on a
that's the same idea.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's dists, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's static. Public seems to be a pretty popular option.
Yeah.
So Turbo's a little bit opinionated in the sense that it configures all that for you. But again, it is a standard, like conventional configuration. I'm not going rogue here. I'm not doing my own thing. It's all like convention. It's the Node Express stuff I've been doing for over 6 years. So I just sort of follow those conventions.
We could change that to whatever we need depending on our project.
In Turbo, you can't.
Okay.
Because I want to keep everything standardized.
For the build.
Correct.
Got it.
Correct. Because I make a lot of assumptions on the deployment.
Got it.
But those assumptions are based on my configurations, right? So I need to make sure everything's consistent.
Okay.
However, what I tried to do is follow convention as much as I possibly could,
Yeah.
which I pretty sure I did. And having done like probably over 1,000 projects now, like I'm pretty sure I followed all the conventions. So this is just another standard convention. Make sure you have the replace all.
This is just another side question. Can we? This is for later, and you don't have to answer it. Can we edit that build process for like the target directories that it's building?
Yeah, actually, we will do some of that today
Okay.
through Webpack and Gulp.
Okay.
That's why we installed
Alright, it's
Webpack.
just gold. That's okay.
Right.
Sure.
You replaced your whole index mustache with the dashboard, right?
Correct. And now if you reload the home page, we should see the theme as we originally saw it. So now we got some stuff to work with. Okay, so now we're ready to go. Let's get rid of this guy. That's just a quick JavaScript. So on the bottom, all the way on the bottom, you'll see all the JavaScript imports. I'm going to remove all these notes because I don't really care about these. And then
Okay, so that stuff's all messed up, so you gotta change the file paths.
And I think that little pop-up is from this notify jQuery little function right here. So just get rid of that. Evidently, it's a timer of 4 seconds. Does everyone here have jQuery experience? Not that it matters, we won't be using much of it, but that was a jQuery function.
So remove the entire timer and everything.
You left a knit chars.
Oh, that's for the chart, the
Yeah,
graphs.
get rid of that.
We'll probably get rid of that too, to be honest.
I just want to make the new font concept here.
These.
Just clean up some of these comments.
Okay, so once we have all this cleaned up, first thing we want to do is configure our build path, so right away we want to get to that, so that we can minify all these assets. We don't want to leave it like this, that's sloppy. Shouldn't take more than 5-10 minutes to minify all that. Concatenate it, throw it into a dist directory, and we want to reference that instead. We're going to do the same thing for the CSS, clean up our imports, get everything optimized, and then start coding. Okay, so we want to do that through gulp. So before I get to that, is everyone good to go? Good? We're good? Okay. So here's the theme again, just make sure you're looking at the same thing, and then let's go ahead to the top. So here on top is the head tag with all the CSS imports. It's only 4, so it's pretty light. Same thing, we're going to just minify, concatenate all of this, optimize our imports, get that out of the way, and make sure we're not deploying sort of sloppy code. So we're going to use gulp to do that. So go back to your terminal and npm id gulp for the development build. And we actually need a few gulp modules. I think there's maybe 4 or 5. So let me just open those up and make sure we have those, the right ones. So. Okay, we're also going to use this one right here, gulp auto prefixer. So npm i-d gulp auto prefixer. We can do all these at once, by the way, which is what we're going to do.
Yeah, I was like, I don't remember the last time I ran individual gulp.
Yeah, gulp
Yeah.
concat. Gulp less. I think we're actually going to use SAS on this one, but confirm that in a second. Does everyone know SAS?
Yeah, we use SAS at MSG.
Excellent, yeah. Gulp minify CSS. Two more, gulp uglify. That's the actual JS minification module. It'll uglify your JS code. And gulp rename. Okay, so go ahead and run that through, and now we have our proper gulp task modules. Oh, you know what? I'm a clown. I forgot. That's already built into the actual scaffold. I forgot that I even did that. We already have these modules. Never mind. So we already have those. So
We don't need some.
yeah, I forgot that I put that into the scaffold already.
So those run on the deploy.
Dev dependencies. They don't go up to the
Okay.
server. Okay.
Alright.
So all of this is actually not necessary. I forgot that that's already written into the scaffold. So it's like even more convenient than I thought. So all right. So we already have all that. So that means we already have a gulp file right here. Everything's already set up to run our gulp tasks. Obviously, we have to rewrite these tasks specifically for the theme. So let's go ahead and do that. So the first thing we want to do is update the CSS task for the new CSS files. So go to your index.mustache and grab these 4 right here. We have to concatenate and minify these guys. So grab those 4 and copy them. Go back to your gulp file.js. Inside the CSS task, let's just rewrite these for the new theme. I think this part is fairly intuitive, right? And again, if it's not, just stop me and I'll explain all this.
So
Oh, you keep the public directory this time.
Right, because gulp doesn't really know that it's running through Node or Express. It's just running the tasks.
So we're only going to end up with 4 files in that task?
Yeah, it's a pretty nice theme. It's just a couple files and that's it. And then what's going to happen, see down here, you can see where gulp,
which one was the performance?
You can see where it goes.
Bootstrap to demo. There's animated paper dashboard.
Matt, do you see any markers over there?
Up at the top.
Okay. Pretty standard gulp
Bootstrap. Those 4. Yeah.
build file,
And then this one.
task, excuse me. Okay, so what's going to happen is it's going to grab these 4, it's going to minify all of them, so it's going to minify the code. I don't know, honestly, the auto producer, I'm not too sure what it does. It's going to concatenate them all into this one file right here and throw the results in that directory. Thank you, the dist.css. So we're going to reference this inside the actual code. Okay, so we can test that right now. So if you open your public directory like this, go to your terminal, make sure you're in the home, the root, and just do gulp CSS. Hopefully it'll run that build, that task successfully. Look at the public directory. You see how the dist file just popped in like that? So that's gulp doing its thing, right? And then we can confirm that the asset was in fact properly generated. So if you look at this, it's all minified CSS. That's
This is what I was asking about before, actually.
correct.
Yeah.
That's what I meant by you're like one step ahead. So like this is exactly it. And this is all conventional task running. Like you can do this in your own projects. It's not like a turbo thing. This is how you run some tasks. Good? Yeah. Matt, just stay here. Like just sit there.
Oh,
Okay, so now what I normally do next is I remove the CSS imports from the head tag completely, and I don't replace it. I reload it to make sure everything was properly removed. Sometimes the browser will cache up for you, so it's kind of hard to know what you're running. Okay, so next thing I'm going to do before I do this is are we together? Are we synced up? Yep. Sure. Take your time. Yeah, I forgot all this gulp stuff and build stuff. It's already set up for you in the project, so that saves some time.
yeah. And you go to the root and gulp CSS.
Change anything.
So you delete this.
In the view.
Like go back to the gulp file. Your gulp file.
Okay, so we have our CSS build. If you go back to the index mustache and remove these 4 CSS imports, and don't replace it with the dist one yet, just go back to the root directory and run the dev server. We want to make sure that everything looks terrible now, right? So that the browser doesn't like throw a cache in there automatically, which oftentimes happens. So now that we've confirmed that, let's go ahead and import our dist, our compiled CSS. So that's public dist css style.min. So dist css style.min.css.
So we remove the 4 that we originally had, right? And then we put in this one.
Yeah, just to make sure.
Yeah.
So now here I'm only doing one import, which in theory should be all four combined if we wrote our tasks properly.
Yeah, I didn't keep it. You kept yours commented out. I just deleted it. Alright.
And now let's confirm that the CSS is properly re-rendering with the concatenated minified version, and then that we can put that off our checklist and move on to the next thing.
So you broke it by changing the gulp file to public, right?
No, I just removed it. It was just empty like this.
Oh, okay.
Right, now we confirm that's broken, and then we hopefully we fix it by putting in the new file.
So we see.
So if I reload the page now, I should be back to where I was, right? But obviously it's now running the build CSS, which is optimized and minified.
When I do Turbo Dev Server, is there like a gulp watch where if I save the mustache file, it'll update, or do I have to run Turbo?
It doesn't run gulp watch, it runs node mount. So you can do gulp watch in a separate tab, which is what I normally do. So I just open another tab and do gulp watch.
I'm getting like some of the styles, not all.
Okay. It's usually a file path thing. So just check your gulp file again and just make sure it matches up. It should be exactly the same as mine because we're using the same theme and everything. So.
Go back to the mustache.
So this would be considered, industry standard optimization. This is considered best practice.
Did you save it?
I mean, there's like some of the styles here. So you got all.
Yeah.
Alright. Let's see.
I'm not going to actually do this today, but if you really want to optimize this guy, this font awesome from the Mac CDN, just download that locally. Also add that to the build, so we don't need any external ones.
Sure.
And then take the Google fonts, put it on top, and then we can add this to the builds as well, so we get the whole thing down to one. That's really the goal. I'm not going to do it today, but I'm sure you guys can figure that out when you go home. It's not exactly rocket science. So that's something else I would normally do. Okay.
So we're missing.
Can I just see the gulp file?
Oh yeah, sure.
Did you create that disk file yourself?
No, the gulp task does that.
Oh, there is a wrench car.
Do I have to run gulp again?
Also, David, right?
Yeah.
It's also right here.
Okay.
Right here. So you could even just copy and paste that, to be honest.
Oh, you have to go. You forgot public here.
Oh, okay. It's weird. I didn't copy this. Okay.
Good to go?
Yes.
First.
We launched it off and I don't see the.
Wait,
Okay, once you confirm that, grab the JavaScript imports on the bottom of the index mustache and basically run the same process. So in the gulp file, it's called the JS task right here, which is line 37 for me, which is probably around the same for you. And just do the same thing. So grab each import. 1, 2, 3 more to go. 1, 2, 3. Ignore the Google one because Gulp won't make that HTTP request for you. It'll just crash it. So ignore that. And then
should in the HTML should we run the Google Maps script before the vendor min?
for now, just ignore it. We're going to import our own. The Google Maps import is a little bit different now.
Okay.
So just remove the whole thing. So now we have our setup here. Go back to your terminal and run this time gulp.js. So gulp.js. Keep your dist file open just so you can make sure it works. And it should pop in that JS directory. And open that guy up, and you should see a huge mess of JavaScript code, which means it all worked. Okay. So now we go back to our index mustache, and we just do the same thing. We remove all those individual imports, and we import the minified dist version. Did everyone confirm that that's what happened? Okay, so go back to your index mustache and remove all these guys. And we should have dist JS and then vendor.min.js. And that should be consistent with the other imports we had earlier, just a concatenated minified version.
So the Google one, we're doing a different one. You also removed the Google one there.
That's gone completely. We'll replace it later this afternoon.
Okay. This one is dist.
We have to do the vendor before the Google Maps call, right?
He said we could just get rid of it.
We'll replace it later after lunch today. Okay, and then just run the dev server and make sure nothing broke. Basically the usual. So if I go back to localhost, everything looks the same as before. Nothing broke. Everything's good to go. We're ready to rock and roll. Are you guys confirmed with the same thing? Okay.
Can I see the top?
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm saying that.
Stuff.
Go down to the bottom. So careful.
All right, once we confirm that everything is maintained, that we didn't break any code, now we're ready to take all this code and throw it into React. So like I was saying earlier, the React code completely resides inside the src directory. The entry point is index.js right here. This is the entry point of the React app, right? And the provider is the Redux integration, which we'll worry about later, but we're going to leave it there for now. Okay. This intro component right here is what you were looking at before, where it says "Welcome to Turbo." Like that's the intro component. In fact, if you even open it up, you'll see all that HTML. You see "Welcome to Turbo," all the stuff, right? So what we're going to do is get rid of this and replace it with all the HTML from index.mustache and make it React compliant, which is a few kind of modifications. And then we're going to carve it out into components, okay? And I find that's how I learn React. I find it's a great way to understand how React actually interacts with the front end. Okay, so let's go back to index.mustache. And you see on top where it says div class wrapper. Let's get rid of these comments, by the way. So right here, div class wrapper, that's going to be the beginning of our entry point, all the way down to the bottom. Okay, so highlight all of that down to here. Basically, inside everything inside the body tag, we're throwing into React. Okay, so just cut that. So now our index mustache is kind of like reverted back to a very bare bones, like nothing, right?
Right.
Now let's inside before we leave this, let's set up the div the div for the root, because again this is a React project, right? So this will be our React entry point. Okay, let's get rid of this chart script. We're not going to use these charts anyway. So let's just get rid of that. It's just going to complicate things. Let's just get rid of that. So now our entry point is very, very bare. It's very stripped down, which is how it should be. Everyone with me? Okay, now let's throw all those contents inside the entry point of the React app right here inside the provider. Okay, this code will almost certainly break. I'm guessing you already knew that. There are a series of modifications we have to make this React compliant. Most notably, everywhere it says class, that's not going to work because that's a reserved keyword in JavaScript. So we have to replace it with what's called class name. Okay, it's a JSS convention. So we do Command Option F. We just do what we did before. We find all references to class and replace it with class name, just like that. Okay.
So
And that's,
Got the equal sign too? Oh, you're
yeah,
right.
because sometimes there might be another class floating around. Like, just don't forget that. And then just do a quick replace all, and that'll quickly get that fixed up.
So did you paste the whole thing on this page?
All of it. Inside
Yeah,
inside the
yeah,
provider.
on his clipboard while he was making those edits.
Yeah.
Inside the provider. Okay? And then just quickly get rid of that class name because I will break it. Now that takes care of that.
So there's an intro in the existing provider. Are we obtaining it?
The intro should be gone.
Okay. So we're replacing the intro with everything that we're pasting.
You got it. And this script down here, let's get rid of that.
Okay. That is okay.
Right, and that should just be 2017.
The copyright one is the one you try to.
Yeah. Now, right now, we are converting the HTML into what's called JSX. JSX is basically like a modified version of HTML that can render inside JavaScript. It has a set of its own rules that you have to be compliant with. Number one is that class versus class name. That's number one. Number two is that you cannot have any unclosed tags. Okay, that will break the JSX. So unclosed tags in HTML are typically IMG, input, BR, HR. These are typically unclosed tags. So you want to find all those instances and close those tags. So for example, a very typical BR is like that. Right? That's how you see that normally happen. That will break the JSX. So you have to close it like that. Okay? Okay? In this particular example, we won't find any of those. So it's a very convenient thing to be using. But normally at this part of the process, I would look for all IMG, input, BR, HR tags, and just quickly close them. That usually takes about 5 minutes.
Is there like a,
HRs too. Say.
Oh, there's an HR? Let's find it.
yeah. Is there a tool you can use that does that automatically, like on the
Ooh,
web?
good catch, Travis. So right here, this will break it. Okay? So we want to close that guy.
Did we rename all classes to class name?
Yeah, we
Yes.
do that.
There's a couple HR.
Yeah, so we can also just do a quick find and replace for
Yeah,
that.
sure. Sorry.
And just find any images, inputs, things like that, and I think we're okay. Okay, so for now we're going to leave it like that. And then the next step of this process is to run the Webpack build, which will certainly find all the errors. So Webpack is kind of like your final step of making sure this conversion worked. If Webpack will then build this by converting all this JSX code into ES5 JavaScript that you will run in your actual front end. Okay, so we're going to do that right now. And anything we didn't properly configure here, Webpack will tell us about, which is good. That way we know if we made any mistakes.
There's
So-
a couple of ones that we had to remove. Which tags were there? The HR?
HR, right? We didn't remove them, by the way. We closed them. So
If it wasn't for self-closing, we just made them self-closing.
correct, exactly. So they should all look like this now.
Self-closing.
So I guess that question I asked when I is it, sometimes there's web tools that'll convert like minified code and unminified. Is there one maybe for, what is this type of HTML called again? That's
JSX.
JSX.
In all likelihood, there is. I
like
just
HTML5
Yeah.
to JSX or something.
I'm
like
sure
that.
there is. There are probably a couple libraries out there that do that. So I'm sure you can find and use
Alright.
them.
Yeah.
Certainly, though, it's a good idea it's good to understand what's going on here.
Sure.
Right.
Because these crashes, these breakages happen all the time.
Yeah.
So if you're not aware of the nuances behind JSX, you'll be chasing bugs forever,
Right.
not realizing that this is a bug right there. That's a bug in JSX. Right. So you want to be aware of that. So let's test this. So go back to your terminal, turn off the dev server, open a new tab by doing Command T, and run a quick Webpack build. And if we didn't catch everything, we'll find out in about 20 seconds. So here, it means it worked. So our React build was successful.
In my
Okay? And let me show you how it looks when it crashes. So here I'm going to crash it on purpose. Okay? So this HR tag right here will crash it. That's why I'm doing that on purpose. So when it doesn't work, it looks like this. And it gives you hopefully a good human readable error message. Right? So usually it does that. Sometimes it doesn't, but usually it does. So it says expected corresponding closing tag for HR, and it gives you a line number. Very nice. Okay? So we go back and we find it, we fix it, and we're good to go.
We need a issue with data background.
Okay, so you find that error and then just rerun the Webpack and make sure you see a couple green lines and you're good to go. We will quickly go into the Webpack config so you can see how everything's working. Okay, so if you look at the Webpack config, this is where all those build processes are being defined. Okay, if you look on line 10, you'll see that the entry point is defined as our React entry point, src/index.js. And then it goes in there and finds all the submodules and compiles them into ES5. And then the output is right here. Bundle, line 14 specifically. Bundle, and then name.js. So in this case, app.js. Okay? And then look at where I put it, public dist. It all goes in the dist. Okay?
Right,
So the
right.
dist is like the ultimate import path. Okay? So if you look at the dist directory, the public directory, now there's another folder in dist called bundle. You see that? And that's going to be our React code. Okay, specifically, there are two imports, commons and app.js. I'm not going to get into the nuances behind that right now, but it's a quick optimization. Basically, I guess I am getting into the nuances. Commons are basically the modules that are used in multiple components. So we strip them out into commons, and then the app.js is a module for one specific UI. We might have another UI later. That's called code splitting. We probably won't get to it this weekend. But I set it up for code splitting right away, mostly just for me, to be honest. But it's a good optimization. Okay.
So those files are just kind of part of your boilerplate you decided to use.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. And this is a very conventional, plain vanilla Webpack configuration. Once again, I'm really following convention here.
Cool.
Definitely not doing anything out of the ordinary. You'll see that I'm also in production. I have a production script that also minifies the code, does all that stuff for you. Rather than spend all your time banging your head against the wall trying to figure this out, just, that's why I set this up. It's not business logic. However,
Interesting.
it is good to know what's going on here so that if you ever need to make changes, you can go ahead and do that.
Yeah.
But I took care of a lot of the nuances for you. You should have a production build versus a staging build. Your production build should minify. Your staging build shouldn't, so that you can debug properly. All that stuff is taken care of for you so you can get right to your work. Right?
Yeah.
So again, this is kind of like the first iteration of Turbo, where I wrote this stuff for myself. So I can just quickly create projects rather than scaffold everything over and over and over again. And apparently people liked it, so
It'd be
they.
interesting to compare these files to what's in MSG, but they'll probably be similar.
Yeah, pretty similar. There's going to be a lot more modules in MSG.
Maybe when I come back tomorrow, I'll look in the repo and see what boilerplate they started with.
Yeah.
And then that would give you some insight.
In a more standard production environment, the loaders, there's going to be like 20 loaders,
Yeah,
and typically more app modules.
got it.
And then whatever other tools that people use.
Sure.
I think I have an error that I need help with.
Sure.
So,
I don't know why it's confirming, because I have that too.
Okay, so we've confirmed that the Webpack build was successful, and that we have our dist/bundle with our React code. So now we need to import those modules into our index mustache so we can run that code, right? So if we open up index.mustache, down here is where we import all that code. So it's dist.bundle, and then commons first. And that's like the universal React. This is basically the React base, the commons.js, because you need to import React before you get to your own custom code. And then down here, it's dist.bundle app.js, and that's your app-specific code within the React context. Okay? And now our index mustache is very minimal. It's 29, 28 lines. And hopefully it'll re-render all the code that we saw moments ago, but now within a React project, hopefully. So let me confirm that in a minute once everyone is ready to go.
So we should open the.
Give it a shot. Run the dev server, open up localhost 3000. Cross your fingers. And I am back in business. Okay, so the important takeaway here is that we are now looking at the same template, project, whatever, within a React project. We have successfully thrown it over to React. Okay.
Some of it changed a little bit, but.
Yeah, I removed the chart. I removed the
Okay,
chart.
got it.
I manually removed that.
can't be
Oh, I'm
found.
still seeing the chart. Am I cached then?
Yeah, I don't have the chart.
Maybe I'm cached.
What's wrong?
I still see the
So
chart.
the previous one, I don't know if it was
Did you
my
remove the,
code editor that was causing the problem.
Okay, so now that we've confirmed that the React code is successfully rendering our template, let's do a lot of cleanup here to get it down to what we want to use. Right, so this user behavior panel, let's get rid of that. These panels down here, let's remove these as well. Basically, let's leave these cards on top, and these will be the items for sale that we see based on where we have the map located. Okay, so let's go back to our index.js. So we're looking for the panel that says users behavior. Let's find that guy. Okay, it's a bit of a ways down. Looks like maybe halfway. So right here, you guys see that? Those contents, let's get rid of them. So inside out, just get rid of all these inner contents.
Everything, okay.
Right, the entire row. Okay. And let's get rid of that. Make sure we didn't break the build. Reload the page. That whole panel should then be gone.
So that it's interesting, the IDE doesn't pick up the HTML, like, it doesn't, like, you know, when you can click on something and see where the next div is. Does your IDE pick that up? Or no?
Oh, I don't think so. It probably does with some sort of plugin that I'm just not using.
Got it.
So now what we don't want to do is run Webpack every time we make a change, right? That could become a little bit arduous, right? So this time when we run Webpack, we do Webpack -w, so we can just leave it on. And every time we make changes, it'll recompile, okay? So now let's run Webpack -w, make sure it doesn't crash. But now it's staying on, right? So now if I reload the home page, that panel has now been removed. Now we're good to go. And then obviously now we want to get rid of these two and just do the same thing, just confirm that it works, right?
So while the server is running, second we said Webpack minus W, right?
Correct. And that way you don't have to like run Webpack over and over again. It's an easy, convenient way to keep it running. Okay, so let's continue that process. So the next row, just get rid of those guys. That's why I said ignore the chart, because these are the charts, right? So we're getting rid of them anyway, so no need to run the JavaScript for that.
Yeah, I wish it showed the ending div. It's a little bit hard to see.
Oh yeah, it's a little bit of a pain. I'm sure.
Never
Like
mind that.
what I do is I go inside out.
Yeah.
I think my Webpack, when I try Webpack minus W, it's giving me an error saying
Okay, now you'll notice that after I saved it, Webpack pops out another sort of build output. So it's watching, recompiling, and if there's any mistakes, you'd see a bunch of red here. And then now we see only that. And these will eventually be the items for sale.
after deleting user behavior, what else did we delete?
Basically everything else. Like this is what I'm down to.
Email statistics and the things, right?
I'm sorry?
Email statistics.
Yeah, all of that. I just left this behind. And these will be like the items for sale based on where we're on the map. So the nice thing we're going to do after we confirm this is we're going to clear out all this stuff so that we can, like, we're going to replace that with the map anyway, so we want to clear all that out. Okay, so like I said when we started this morning, we're going to set everything up with like static data, get all the UI properly configured. That's step one. Step two is hooking it up to our Redux architecture. That'll be this afternoon. Step three, tomorrow, is connecting it to a live backend so we can create a real application. And step four is hooking up some cool functionality like SMS notification, email notification, and hopefully payments integration. So right now we're still on step one, just getting everything set up, getting some static data in there, making sure it looks nice, all that good stuff.
So should we just clear out the UL of nav?
Yeah, go ahead and do that if you're at that step. Just go ahead. You can kind of see where this is going, right? So just go ahead and clear out the nav bar.
The one on the left or the top?
The one on the left.
Okay.
So you see where it says over here, UL class name nav.
Yeah.
The entire UL. Don't worry about the individual elements inside. We want to get rid of the whole thing anyway.
All right.
Including the logo. You see the div class name logo? We want to get rid of that too. We want to be down to this, the sidebar wrapper, and that's it. Okay, so the whole sidebar should just be a blank, empty white space because that's where the Google map is going to go. Okay, so we're removing stuff, which is good. It's easier to sort of reason about the code when there's less code there. Okay, and since I have Webpack running just all the time, I can just reload and it should render properly, unless I made a mistake. So that's what we want to see. And now we're one step closer to our UI.
Oh, you took out creative sim.
Everything, right? Because that whole thing will just be a map.
So next one, it's available in the main panel.
I'm sorry?
Yeah, sorry.
But you kept sidebar wrapper? Yeah, all right.
Yeah.
Cool.
Okay, so right now we're just organizing our code. Then after we get through some more basic housekeeping, we're going to split this up into sub-components because I would imagine by now you understand from a React standpoint this is far from best practice, right?
Yeah.
So we want to take all this and sub it out, organize them into their own sub-components. So we'll do that in a few minutes once we do a little bit more housekeeping, and then we'll start splitting this out.
So you're using this kind of as a way to learn React, but in actual practice you would just build each component from scratch. You wouldn't really start with this HTML, right?
Unless I'm using a whole new theme.
Okay.
Like if I'm using a whole new theme, I actually would do this.
Oh, you'd start with like the example content.
Yeah,
right.
if I'm
I
using a
gotcha.
whole new theme.
Yeah.
But
with,
if I have,
the
like,
norm
my
of
own-
some
right.
or whatever.
But
Okay. Yeah.
You're probably the same way. I have a million projects I've
Yeah,
done in
new
the past.
theme. Yeah.
I just put in my old code. So
Sure.
that's correct.
Got it.
But I'm also, part of the reason I designed this week workshop the way I did is because this is essentially how I learned React.
Yeah.
I'll just go through a bunch of like regular HTML code
Yeah.
and convert them into React UIs.
No, it seems logical.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's what I did for about 3 or 4 months before I got really, really comfortable with the React sort of thought process. So,
Can you look at the your dev localhost?
but yeah, sure. The local host. So,
Alright. That's,
No, that's fine. I could charge you if you guys. Well, actually, I probably wouldn't do it.
yeah, this is the C.
UCC.
Never mind.
All good.
Yeah, can I see your local on the website?
website.
I'm gonna make sure I put.
Also, by the way, this is the React Chrome plugin. This is a nice nifty little tool to see which websites are running React. So whenever this guy shows up in orange or blue, you'll know that the website is running React. Then you get a better sense of how many websites are in fact running React.
Is it this one? What's it called?
React Chrome plugin, the developer tools.
React Dev Tools.
Okay, you like React Developer Tool? That one?
Yeah.
Alright, cool.
And then once you start having that in, you'll start to notice just how many websites use React. And then you realize, oh crap, I gotta get on this. Like,
Yeah,
this-
yeah.
And then there's like a React. There's also like a React tab in like Chrome Dev Tools, so you can like inspect.
Oh, okay, that's cool.
So here is the AWS panel you see that's running React. That's how you tell. Yahoo Fantasy runs React because I can see that pop up every time.
Yeah, that's cool.
Instagram, right here's my YMCA at Instagram that's running React. Right?
Does the mobile app run on React too, or is that different?
Which one?
Like if you look at it on your phone, the mobile app.
Depends on the site. So I know like
Okay.
Reddit, the
No, I
mobile.
mean the Instagram app on your phone. Is that running in
Oh,
React or is that
that's probably
Objective-C?
React Native. Probably.
Okay.
I have to confirm that, but
Got it.
it's probably React Native.
Cool.
Are we all good to go here?
Yep.
Okay, so now, from a UI standpoint, we pretty much have what we want for now. I'm going to make a minor modification that I didn't exactly plan on right away, but let's do it anyway. Like this sidebar, this is a prominent section of our UI. That's where the map is going to be, right? So it's not quite wide enough for its importance. I want to make it wider, okay? So if you look at the actual source, inspect, the sidebar wrapper, you'll see that it has a fixed width of 260, right? Now we want to make that maybe like 300, 320, something like that. Give it more room because the map is an important part of this UI. Now what we don't want to do is go into the CSS and change this. That's not going to work. It will work, but it won't create the effect that you want because this number right here is probably used in multiple locations. That's a variable inside of the Sass build process.
Yeah.
What we really want to do is change that variable inside of the Sass files and then rerun the Sass. Okay? Let's go ahead and do that. So inside the public CSS, we probably should have done this before we convert to React, but whatever, it's only going to be a few minutes. So we have public CSS, and then let's see if we find it here, 260. Okay, so it looks like it's going to be here, and then let's see. Oh, I'm sorry, the Sass directory. I'm in the wrong directory. So inside the Sass directory is where you're going to find all those variables.
Yeah.
So inside here is where all the Sass modules are imported. We pretty clearly wouldn't want the sidebar one, right?
Yeah.
So if we look at the sidebar one,
There's a way Chrome tells you.
It's line 33, I think.
right. So here we have 33
Chrome will tell you.
and 14.
One of these it's in.
But those are the compiled versions. Like those aren't the Sass files.
Okay.
So Chrome will tell you the actual resulting CSS.
I
Oh.
thought Chrome has a way to tell you the Sass file it's in too. Like,
Oh,
that's
probably.
a different
It probably
way.
does,
Yeah, or
which I don't know.
something. Okay.
So let's go with 320 on this. Just give it some extra room. So 320 right here, as well as right here. Honestly, this should be just a single variable reference. So like We shouldn't have to make 2 changes. There should just be 1 variable
Yeah.
that we can just change. And then if we go to the variables CSS, SCSS, we want to find that one too. Right here. So this should be
off
320.
canvas sidebar, that needs 320 also.
Correct.
Sorry, I lost.
So I made
We're gonna
3
make
changes. 3 changes. Okay.
So we changed 3 places from 260 to
320.
240. One is the off-canvas sidebar, right?
Yep. The exact line numbers are 14.
Oh, that's in the sidebar.
Mhm.
So 320.
Line 14, line 33. And then if you go to the variables SCSS, you'll find also one more reference. On line 229. Like I
Are we
said,
gonna make this into a variable or just leave it?
just leave it for now because this is all we're going to do. It really should have been a variable, so that's a bit of a curious move on the themes part, but whatever.
Alright.
And then now we got to run the SAS build inside the gulp file. Okay, so let's go back to our gulp file real quick. You got all the changes for us? Okay, so we have to create a new task. I just copied and pasted CSS1. Create a new task called SAS, which will be just an empty task for now. Okay.
Do you have to like import or like require gulp SAS?
Yes, because the default on Turbo is less. So we have to import the individual module for SAS, which I think is just gulp SAS. So let's go ahead and find that guy. Gulp SAS. Right here, gulp SAS. We could even just copy this, install direct, and it'll work. So turn off your server. npm install gulp SAS to the dev. And let's run that guy through the build. Hopefully this is the only adjustment we need to make on the SAS.
If we just did npm install gulp, would that install all the libraries for us?
No, gulp is its own
Okay.
module.
Okay.
It's very decentralized. I might just include this in the default builds in the future. Why not? Like,
Do you mind hopping over to the gulp file again?
I don't think we written anything in there.
it's just empty, an empty SAS task. That's it. Now let's take the basic example from the npm page.
So we did the gulp install and then we restarting Webpack. Running.
We haven't run Webpack yet.
Webpack's still running auto.
So import the gulp SAS module. I'm using the basic example from the npm page. So just go ahead and import that. Just regular import, nothing out of the ordinary here. Okay. And let's just set up a quick SAS build. Okay, this is a direct copy and paste from the example. Okay, I'm literally just copying and pasting an example. So just highlight that example right there and just paste it in. And let's tweak it for our purpose. Obviously, that's what we're doing. Okay, so
And where did we get that from? The gulp source from the
just the basic usage example right here. Just literally just copying the most primitive example. I'm just gonna tweak it because we're not doing anything crazy. We're just changing a variable. Okay, so here's what I have so far. This won't work yet. Now, our SAS file is located in the public directory, so this is important. Make sure you catch this. So we have to grab it from the public directory. Luckily, it's already in the SAS folder, which is nice. And it's paper-dashboard SCSS. Okay. Now we don't want to send it over here, right? Line 32, that's the wrong destination, right? So we want to send it to public CSS. However, we do not want to put it in the dist.
Oh.
Okay, we want to leave it in there because the dist references this output to create its own dist. Okay, it's a very small thing that's easy to miss, all right? So let's test that, guy. So now we do gulp, go back here and do gulp sass.
And that's the same reason all the files above go to this regular CSS folder.
You got it, exactly. So now if we open up the paper-dashboard CSS file, all those 260 pixels should be gone, hopefully. And we should now see 320px. Oh, why is it 20?
But you went and ran gulp from the console.
So now you see how it says 320px? You see that, the width? That's from the redefining of the Sass modules. Okay? So now keep in mind, we only ran the Sass build, so now we got to run the CSS build to recompile the CSS assets. Does that make sense? And that's why we don't put this in the dist. That's exactly why. So we do gulp CSS. And then we run the dev server and hope that it worked.
Can you see the gulp task that's asking?
Right here. Okay, just a quick Sass adjustment. It's worth knowing how to do that. And Less fundamentally works the same way, so I'm not really sure why one's more popular than the other. They're basically the same. So now if you look at my UI, it's a little bit wider. That's what we want. Obviously, you can change the number to whatever.
You went going back to the task.
So yeah, mine's. Oh, I have to run gulp sass. Okay,
You want to run that first, and then gulp CSS second.
got it. I never ran.
And I'll show you how to combine all that in one step in a second. I just want to make sure you understand all the
Yeah.
pieces that go into this.
Yeah, we usually run the combinational one. That's why I'm not used to running these individually. Okay.
Right.
Gotcha.
Maybe another called Sass is not defined.
Just make sure you
gotta
have
the far. Yeah.
right here. Make sure you have the task.
You
and the-
up at the top, right? Var Sass equals var gulp Sass.
So we run gulp CSS.
Sass.
I got it.
Sass. Hey Matt, just stay on top. Like, just make sure he's going around.
Gulp sass, right?
So once we confirm that this is properly rendering what we want it to, obviously we don't want to have all these tasks floating around. Let's combine them and just make it one script that runs all of them.
So gulp Sass, gulp CSS, right?
Correct. In that order. In that order. Right.
And afterwards,
Just reload the page, make sure it looks okay.
We'll do
So
gulp
that's
Sass
like
first,
the
then
one
gulp
of
CSS. You did CSS first though, there. So Sass.
You wanna check
yeah,
that,
yeah,
right?
you're right. Well, I'll just do CSS. It's Turbo, and that's her.
Okay, so now let's configure so that the CSS task will run the Sass task for you. So it's kind of like the CSS one depends on this one. Like this one should never run without that one running first, right? So let's just make that happen. So inside the CSS task, we just insert an array here. and put in SAS, like that. So what that means is run that guy first and then run the CSS build. So now we can just do gulp CSS, which will run this first. That's how you combine stuff. Okay, so now I can go back here and just do gulp CSS. Not that it matters anymore because we already confirmed it, but this will run the SAS. You see how it runs SAS right here? And then CSS. And that's what you want. Creating less stuff to remember, you know, like it's just easier to do that. The idea being that this one should never happen without that one. They're fundamentally one task, so just combine them. That's it.
If I type in just gulp, it runs all this task in the file, right?
Yeah, it does gulp. The gulp alone just does everything.
Got it.
Just JS, task, whatever.
That's usually what I run. Okay.
But it,
That's
yeah,
nice
that's
to know. I
correct.
never knew that. That's
Right.
cool.
That's how gulp is organized, so you can like
Yeah.
get into the interlocking pieces and make changes and whatnot.
Can you go back to the CSS task for me?
Right here.
Right, so CSS.
And this was the adjustment we made right there.
Yep.
Because I find myself often digging around in here, making all these small changes, and you want to know kind of how everything comes together.
Yeah.
Because it's going to come up. Good? Good?
Yeah.
All right, great. So let's now go back and make sure the UI has been maintained. So run the dev server. Okay, good. And make sure that you see a wider sidebar, right? And obviously you can make it whatever number you want. The reason we ran this through SAS is because a bunch of other this UI is based on that number, 320 versus 260. So rather than change it inside the CSS in like 25 different places, that's what SAS is for, right? And less. So that's taken care of. So let's go back to our code now. Okay, finally, let's get the React stuff going. All that SAS stuff I honestly should have done before we did the React conversion, so just understand that. Now, like I was saying earlier, all of this code shouldn't really be here. Right? The entry code should just render basically one component. So I'm going to create a component inside this directory, the components directory. So let's go to the SRC. Let's create a CD into the components. Let's create a new file called home. And that'll be our home page, our home component, whatever you want to call it. Okay, so we're creating a new file called home.js. Okay. CD back to the root because it's just easy to forget to do that. Open up the home.js and let's create our React component. Let's do all this from scratch, just a good exercise. So I'm just going to import the necessary React modules. And let's create a class called home. It's going to extend the component class. Do a quick export default because I always forget that. And then render. Okay, so I'm guessing we understand by now that every React component is a subclass of the component library from the React framework, and we have to override only one method called render. And inside the render is where we define the literal HTML or JSX that defines that code. Okay, so inside here is where we're going to actually define the UI of this component, and for now it's just going to be a straight swap from the entry point. So does everyone have this? So let's go inside our index.js. And all that code we dumped in, let's just move it inside to the home.js.
I'm going to
Yep.
Going to the components and then what did we do there?
We created this component right here called home.js. You see that?
Yeah.
And then the home.js is just an empty component for now.
Okay.
But we're about to fill it up with our previous content, so just copy and paste all that code into here. So we're just moving code around.
Okay,
Just
so
moving
where are
around.
we copying this code from? I'm sorry.
Oh, the index.js.
Oh,
Right.
that's it.
And then you can probably figure out by now we're going to continue carving this up into more and more subcomponents. But the first thing we got to do now is go back to the index.js and re-render this guy, right? Let's go back to index.js, and instead of the intro, just import the home. and then re-render the home component. And now this is looking much more appropriate for an entry point in React. Okay? And then go to your terminal, make sure Webpack didn't crash, which it didn't. I'm going to rerun Webpack anyway. I find that when you add new code, Webpack sometimes doesn't pick it up. So you want to just rerun Webpack when you add new files as well as delete. So everything rebuilt successfully. Let's go back to the Turbo Dev server and make sure nothing got lost in that transfer. Perfect. Okay, so now we're one step in the right direction.
Okay, I'm lost on
Sure.
one.
Sure.
The copy from the, what does home.js look like? Okay, those imports up top, you got those from index.js?
Here's the home.js.
Okay, so home.js, class home extends component render return. Okay, so you just copied the HTML and
From the index.js into here.
got it. And you didn't take the provider stuff.
Nope, that stays in the index. Good question.
You're gonna put home in there.
Right.
Okay, I got it.
And then don't forget to export it down here. This is something I often forget, is line 211. Just don't forget that.
Okay. And then in index.js, what does that home look like? What's that syntax? The home in
So
there?
index.js is very like
Okay.
bare now.
Oh, it's just like an HTML
Yes.
element looking
Right.
thing. Okay.
Can you wait 2 minutes?
Yep.
I can figure out what the issue on the machine is and that the videos.
So we're beginning the process of carving up the HTML into subcomponents. This is the first sort of step of that. So I'm sure you can kind of see where it's going. We're going to now go into the home component and carve that up into subcomponents. So React, if you're not familiar, is essentially like building a website UI like you would build like Lego pieces. You just take a bunch of Lego pieces and put them together. Those Lego pieces in this analogy are the components. So we have to define those Lego pieces and then put them together to create our UI. And that's what we're doing right now.
Do you mind putting this on Slack?
Oh yeah, this one right here.
I think you want home, right? That's index.
It's even index of the remove out of the operating point.
Oh, no. We just wanted to take the,
Alright, I got it.
from the wrapper. We're taking this out and we're putting that in front.
Just take this one.
Yeah. I would, yeah. Maybe,
Yeah. Oh yeah, sorry man. Yeah, just go. Can you fit it in there? Does it fit? Let me know if it's still working. Yeah. We're sharing one.
Yeah,
So you took out import intro from the top. We're not
Now,
using that for this.
component from home.
And as we make
We wanna,
changes, because the dev server's running, it picks up these changes. We
Make
make
this
it into
class
action.
called home.
They're automatic. Are they refreshing Ajax, or we gotta refresh the page manually?
You refresh, but that's called hot
Yeah,
reloading.
all you
You
need
can set up
is-
hot
is-
reloading.
is
I just
file.
don't do that.
Yeah, hot reload. Okay.
You can delete this.
On Slack.
Yeah.
Now, David, I do find that on occasion it doesn't pick up when you add new files. That's
Yeah.
why I always manually rebuild.
I like to refresh myself anyways. You know,
Right.
I mean, some people they have a certain
Which
amount of
comes from
automatic
React.
things going. Sometimes I like to have a little bit of
Yeah.
control, just at some
And
point.
then open that up, and all of us have.
Okay, so now we have our home component properly defined. Let's continue this process. Let's start breaking this guy down. So if we actually look at the UI, you can see how the component should be organized intuitively. Like on top, right here, the dashboard, that should be its own component, right? We'll call that nav, the nav bar. All right, so let's go ahead and find that. So here, I believe it's literally a nav HTML tag. So right here, you see where it says nav, line 15 for me, right? That's the top nav bar, right? I believe. Let me just make sure I'm not. Dashboard. Yeah, okay, that's it, right? So that whole nav tag should be its own component, okay? Now this component in particular, if you look at it, It's a very like simple component. It's basically just rendering some HTML and that's it, right? That component is what we refer to as a presentation component, or sometimes called a DOM component. Its only job is just to render some data, and that's it. It doesn't have anything more sophisticated to do, like process data or like render changes to data, nothing like that. It just literally shows something. So what we want to do is define that component inside a different directory. You see how the components directory has containers?
Right.
There should really be another directory in there called presentation. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that right now. So we go,
Is that the same term as like a functional component? Like a DOM component?
not exactly, but we're going to use a functional component. So oftentimes, what you're referring to is called a stateless functional component, are typically DOM components. They're basically like one in the other. So we're going to use that right now, as a matter of fact. So if we go here, components. So we want to make a new directory called presentation, and then cd into that. Create an index file. So that's this right here. Oh, this is hard to see. This right here. And then create the nav.js. Okay, so if you go and go back to the root level so you don't forget. And then if you open up the presentation directory, you're going to have those two files. Let's open up the nav.js. And so what Travis was referring to here is a special kind of component called a stateless functional component, which is like the simplest kind of component you can possibly make. So we're going to do that right now. Basically, if you look at the home component, we basically have we defined a full class here. A class is a lot more than you need. Like it's got methods, properties, all that stuff. Like you can have internal state. A stateless functional component, not really. It's just here's some UI, put it wherever you want to put it. So that's essentially why we would want to use a stateless functional component here. So that's what I meant by DOM components and functional components typically operate in tandem, right? Because they just render stuff. So here we import React. And this component declaration will look a little bit different. So the entire component itself is just a function, hence the name functional component. Okay, so we're just defining a function here, right? And then we just do a return. And I may have copied the nav bar, I did not. So let's go back to our home component, grab the nav bar, and just dump it in there. And that's it. Okay. So stateless functional components are like the closest you're going to get to just raw HTML and React. That's essentially what we're doing here, just raw HTML.
It is a nav bar, right?
Mm-hmm.
This all abides by the same JSX requirements as well, right? Anything inside these files.
Same thing, because it's still JSX at the end of the day.
Yeah.
That's correct.
So we just copy the entire nav bar.
Yep, just moving pieces around, and we're just sort of carving up the home page into subcomponents right now. That's what we're doing. Okay, so like I said this morning, setting up the UI, getting the data sort of properly positioned, getting all that looking right, and then we're going to hook it up during the afternoon. Okay, so now let's go back, go to the index.js in the presentation. Okay, let's import that guy. That wasn't nav. And then let's export that guy. So your presentation directory, as you might imagine, is going to have like a lot of components. It's like the main UI layer of your application. There's going to be like 25 components in there. So you want to export all of them in the index.js. So you don't have like 40 lines of imports all over the place. That's going to be a huge pain. Okay. And then we go to our home.js and we import that guy. So import nav.
Interesting, you just write the word nav like that.
spell that right? Presentation. Yeah. Okay, so what I'm going to do next is, pretty intuitively remove the nav bar from here, but don't replace it yet. Let's render it without the nav bar first, just to make sure it was properly removed. There's no weird funky caching going on. So let's go ahead and remove it. So completely removed.
We don't have to import it from presentation /index.
No, the index is implicit. Oh, so that's why I actually said it. I should have explained that. So the index is implicit, and that's why we set it up that way. It makes life a lot easier. So let's go back here. I'm going to rerun Webpack because, like I said, whenever I add new files, new stuff, I get a little bit cautious about this, and I want to make sure I didn't overlook it. And then go back here, run the dev server. Now remember, we removed the nav bar and did not replace it, so that's what we expect to see. Okay, this is success because we removed it and we didn't replace it.
Yeah.
Okay, so now let's replace it with our component, and hopefully we're back to square one. So here we replace it with our component, and that's like a new Lego piece we've added to the UI. And then just go ahead and confirm that you're back to where we were before.
Well, we picked it up. I just saved the file and it picks it up. That's cool.
Cool. Okay, and eventually,
Sorry, what's the change in the UI once you make those changes?
we should be back to where we were.
You're adding the nav like that,
Right,
where
right,
the nav
right.
code was.
I did something else because I'm missing the dashboard now.
You're importing it up top?
Yeah, make sure you have this.
I got it. I mean that part's working. That's wait. I guess so I have it. Presentation. That's not a problem. Where is the nav now?
And then if you look at the nav itself, just copy and paste it.
Can you go to the bottom of the nav.js? Index.js, all it's doing is exporting nav, importing from .nav,
Correct.
and it's exporting to nav.
So this is kind of, so in nav.js, since you're not naming it like NAV, capital NAV, when I'm in Chrome, or React DevTools and inspecting that element, it's coming up as an unknown element.
Oh yeah, I had lowercase mine too.
Like in React DevTools, the element is called unknown.
So when you if I do this,
Yeah, if you do like,
expect,
and then pop over to the React, go to the React tab. Right there next to all that's, yeah. And then when you go, see unknown, that's the component.
oh yeah. That's probably because we didn't give it a name. We didn't define it as a class.
Yeah.
That's not a problem. Like,
No,
it's fine.
I know. I just was talking out loud.
So can you look at this one?
As far as how you doing?
Yeah.
Is it working?
The nav is back.
This is breaking the code in like different parts.
That's weird.
Okay, so we have our first subcomponent, which is a nav bar.
I'm using those Babel.
So let's sort of continue that process, right? So if we go back here, towards the bottom, like all this stuff down here, that should be its own component, right? You can probably even figure what the name is going to be. Like, what do you think the name should be? Footer, right? So it's great. Let's go back to our presentation directory and create a new component called footer.
Presentation, okay.
Yep. And it's basically the same process, right? It's going to be stateless functional, right? So let's go ahead and open that up. I think by now we can do this through copy and paste. So I normally don't recommend copy and paste, but we've done this enough now. So grab the footer from the home.js. And just throw that guy inside the stateless functional. And then don't forget to import it in the index. Very easy to forget. So go back to the index and then import the footer. So now we have our footer component, right? So now we have that ready to go. So we go back to the home.js and import that guy. So the home.js, that's how you import it. Okay?
Is it restroom?
Oh, down to the right. And now we have our footer component like ready to go to use like any other Lego piece. Okay? So let's go ahead and
Can you just index.js real quick?
sure.
Alright.
This one.
Yeah, okay, yeah. Import footer, I just missed that part. Alright, cool. So that's the one you said no, it's not.
Right. I often forget that, so I try to remind myself right away. And once again, I added a new file, so because I'm particularly cautious about it, I just rerun Webpack and then get the dev server going. And just reload it. It should look no different because we put it back in anyway. Okay, so once you've confirmed that, we have that part carved out. That's good to go. Can anyone see one more sort of natural component here? Or at least one more.
Catch up, sorry.
Oh yeah, just make sure everything builds first, and then we'll move on. We'll wait for Christian to come back too.
We create the JS file and making it not capital, small.
No, these were capitalized. Footer, no.
Okay.
Travis is accurate. The convention is capital for components.
Okay.
The only exception is index.
Got it. And then when you're importing them, you continue it, okay? You
Yep.
continue using them as capitals.
Yeah, pretty much. I never don't do that. So that capital M, capital F.
Got it.
Good.
Good.
Okay. So let's go ahead and get that last component out. So like I was saying earlier, these are going to become their own components as well, but it's one component rendered 4 times. So we're going to call this component item, and those will be the items for sale in a garage sale or whatever. So let's go back to our components directory, cd src components. This is also a presentation component. I'm going to call it item, capital I, see that? Item. Okay.
It's really nice.
And then here it is, imported inside the index, because again, this is so easy to forget, and if you forget, it makes your world a nightmare.
Okay, most.
Okay, and then go into the item.js. Just set up another stateless functional component. I didn't explain this props argument. So you can pass in a props to the component when you render it, so that every component can render slightly dynamic data. Like maybe you don't want the same text every single time, right? So you can pass those in as props, and that's where that's where this comes into play. So we will certainly be doing that later this afternoon, is passing in props into a stateless functional component. So like I was saying earlier, stateless functional components basically just render static UIs, right? But you want to have some dynamic capability, and that's where the props come in. And basically the props are, here's what we want you to render, okay? So it shouldn't be just raw static HTML every single time. That's pretty rare. Okay, so the item, I assume we all have some Bootstrap experience, or I mean, if we don't, just tell me. So if we look here, from here to here is one item. Okay. The reason I'm referencing Bootstrap is because these classes are Bootstrap classes. Okay. So that's how you tell that's the item, because it's one. Well, a call 3 means it's 1/4 of the whole thing, right? So we have 4 items listed, right, in the current UI, 1, 2, 3, 4. That means those are all call 3s. 12 divided by 3 is 4. So that's going to be our item, right? So we just grab that and return that inside the functional component.
These are going to have some dynamic data in them.
Correct, which is why I brought up the props discussion a minute ago. Because obviously there's going to be a variety of items, right? So we want to make sure we can handle that situation. Okay, so now we have that properly configured. If we go back to the home.js and import the item, and we do what we did before. Just go back here. And let's render just one item for now, just because. So get rid of all these other call 3s, whatever. And so what I do to make sure I keep track of my divs, you see I go inside out. Like I start here, just get rid of that. And I just go inside out. That way I don't make that mistake of losing track. Now look at our home component, very stripped down. Right? It's just a collection of subcomponents. Okay, that should be your goal. Like that's what you're trying to strive to. Okay, we still have more to go here. Like there's more stripping out we're going to do.
So we stripped out the call large 3, call small 6, right?
Right, and we moved that into the item component.
Right.
And I only rendered one item. So now when I reload the page, I am going to run Webpack because I created a new file. And then when I reload the page, this should now be reduced down to just one item. Okay? And there we go.
So I stripped all the items.
Mhm. And let's clean up our indents because this is certainly sloppy. So let's take care of that.
So there are 4 of them previously, right?
Correct. Now let's restore the other. So we just do 1, 2, 3. Obviously, they'll be the same item every single time, but let's just make sure it still looks okay.
Yeah.
This is more of a visual confirmation.
First.
So when I reload, I will just see the same item over and over again. Okay, how are we doing on that? So now our home component is looking more and more like a bona fide React entry point. Like this is how it should be, just a series of subcomponents. Good?
Yes.
Good. Just do a little bit of cleanup. All right, is everyone got this for us? You good? Okay, so now on the left side, well, what are we going to do? We're going to have that Google Maps on there so we can move the map around, right? Let's do that right now. So the Google Maps component, we're going to use a library called React Google Maps, and we're going to import that into the UI. First thing we need to do is import just the Google Maps JavaScript, so what we removed earlier. Let's restore that, but we're going to go back to our index.mustache and restore it here. So right here is where we're going to import the Google API JavaScript. Okay?
The one that was there before, right?
Yeah.
Maps.googleapis.com.
Oh no, don't replace it. We're going to use a different one.
Alright.
Okay. So just set up an empty script import for now.
Yeah,
Okay?
So this is going to index.instance, right?
Yes.
So
Okay, just an empty script import right here. That's going to be our Google Maps import in a couple seconds.
Sure.
Okay, so we're going to import this from a gist file. Do you guys know gist? Yeah, so we're going to import this from one of my gist files. So here is the actual gist file. Obviously, I'll put it on Slack. So just go ahead to Slack and click on this link. Okay. And here is the import we're going to use. That's my API key. Feel free to use as much as you want. But that's the import we're going to use. Okay. Got that? So go ahead and import that guy. I guess we didn't need to set up that script placeholder. So now we have our Google Maps API import ready to go.
What'd you search for in just again? Sorry.
Oh, it's in the workspace. It's in the Slack. It's right on top. It's literally the second line where it says don't forget the Google Maps import, because I always forget.
Alright. Cool.
Okay. I don't think this is going to happen, but if you plan on aggressively using this, please get your own API key. It takes 2 minutes. So, good? Okay. Staying on this gist file, because we're going to use it, React Google Maps is the component library we're going to use to render the maps. Okay? So, go back to your terminal and import that guy. Like that. Make sure you have that. Okay? Just like that. And just go ahead and run that through.
Oh, that.
Just run that through. And that's the component library we will use to render React, a Google map inside of React. Okay?
So whenever we're going to use like vendor React kind of tools, we should usually install look on npm to see if something's available, and then kind
For anything broadly used. So like Google Maps is clearly
Yeah.
a broadly used. And
sure,
more than likely, whatever third-party
like a
library.
slider or something like that.
Exactly.
Okay.
Or like a modal, like that's very broadly used.
Sure.
Loaders, things like that.
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
more than likely, those components are heavily tested,
Cool.
and you want to go with that. Good? Okay, so now, sticking with the gist file,
So the capital S, does that just go to your dependencies, and capital D, is that the same as like save that?
yes, so
Capital
this
D.
import is the same as install React Google Maps dash save. Same,
Okay.
literally the same thing,
Cool.
it's just shorthand notation. So, where was I? Okay, so this gist file is a map component that I wrote, which is a wrapper around the React Google Maps. The React Google Maps is a little bit funky the way it's organized. They force you to inject the Google Maps inside of what's called a higher order component. That is beyond the scope of this workshop. So what I wrote is basically a presentation layer around that so that we can just render the map component and just be good to go. So we're going to use that. Okay, so if we go back to our components directory and then the presentation directory, right here, okay? We're going to create a map component because it's a presentation layer, right? So touch. Okay? We just created a map component, that's all we did.
Yep.
In the presentation directory, make sure you're in the right one. Okay? Grab the contents of the gist file, because trust me, you don't want to do all this on your own. This is a pain. So, and then go into the map component and just paste it in. So here's what I meant if you want to look through it. The actual Google Map component, this is the higher order component right here. Again, that's beyond the scope of this workshop, but they essentially made you render everything through the HOC at the lowest level, to which I thought this is going to be hard to remember every single time. So what I wrote was an abstraction on top of that called map, which basically does that part for you. And then you can just render the map component. And you'll see what I mean by that when we use it. It's very intuitive, okay? So make sure you have that. And then export it in the index, same as usual.
You usually copy everything in that gist file, right?
Yeah, literally a one-to-one, just copy and paste.
You're gonna get it raw.
You guys got that? And then inside your home component, import the map. You know, the usual stuff, just import, export, whatever. Good?
Did you add the map component to the page?
Not yet.
All right,
I just
got it.
imported.
I
That's
saw
it.
you copy some script. All right.
Okay, what I'm going to do is add it, make sure it works. I don't want you to follow me, I just want you to watch me. I'm going to explain all the pieces, and then you do what I just did. Got it? Make sense? Okay, so just let me know when you're ready, and we'll do that.
So we just added the map.js and we included it in the index.
Yes.
That's all we did so far.
And then don't forget this import online too.
On home.js, right?
Yes.
Okay. Easy. Map. Cool.
Okay, so now here, right here, this is the sidebar. You see that? Those 4 or 5 lines?
Right?
Right, that's the sidebar. That's this empty white space over here.
Yeah. Good.
Right, that's where the map is supposed to go. So let's go ahead and do that. So here, again, don't just watch me, don't follow me. Here, I'm rendering the map component. Now, certain pieces should be pretty intuitive, like the zoom level. That's the zoom level.
Yeah.
Of the map.
The center, it's an object with a Latin long. This is Midtown Manhattan. Okay? These 2 elements are required properties on the map component. Container element and map element. Basically, just give it a div with as much room as you need. 100%, 100%. Okay? And then I'm not going to explain this yet, but I will after I render it. So what are we doing here? We're rendering Midtown Manhattan, or like Lower Manhattan, at a zoom level of 14. Okay? And these 2 should just basically always be 100%, 100%. Okay? Because why would you ever not want to occupy the entire thing? If this was 50% and 50%, then the map would only go down halfway.
Yeah.
That's the thought process behind that. Okay?
Right?
So then here, so here I'm referencing state. This will crash right now. Okay? So I'm referencing state, which doesn't exist. So let's go ahead and set up the state. So here, the state is where you store all the attributes of a component that are internal to itself. That doesn't make a lot of sense, I know, but it'll make more sense when we use it over and over again. So we have the state, right? In particular, we're referencing the map property on the state, which should be initially null. Okay, and then this will populate that object. So now, one last sort of gotcha that's very easy to forget. We're putting the map inside of the sidebar wrapper. And what you got to remember is that the map doesn't exist on load. It gets loaded client side, right? So the sidebar won't have any vertical space until the map shows up, which means it won't render. So what we would need to do is give it a height of like 960 or enough to fill up the entire page, right? You can always err on the side of caution and make that like 2000 because it's a movable map. So no matter what, the user's going to see the same zone anyway, right? So it doesn't really matter. So if I reload,
That height is for.
I'll show you.
The sidebar.
Yeah, it'll make more sense to show you when it doesn't work. So like I'll show you when hopefully it'll work. But
Could you do like 100 VW?
oh yeah, that'll work too.
Or I mean VH?
Yeah, that'll work too. Just give it some height is what I'm trying to say. Okay.
So that's for
Okay.
basically when it renders on the server before it comes to the client's browser. Is it something?
Right, because Google Maps is rendering the map on its own client side. This is
Yeah.
like a double client side rendering here, right? So we have the React client side render and then the Google Maps one. That means the div isn't populated initially. Divs, the way they work is they size based on what's inside. Well, there's nothing inside, right? So if I didn't do that, if I just remove this, right? There's going to be nothing inside there. So when Google populates it with the map, the div is like already like whatever. There's nothing in here.
Yeah.
That's a little sort of gotcha you got to be aware of. Okay,
So real quick, what's that syntax with the double handlebars? Is that like
yeah, excellent question. So this is how you do styling in JSX.
Okay.
So JSX has very, very peculiar styling syntax. Okay, you can't just do regular HTML styling. So here, this will crash it. That's what you normally do.
Yeah.
That's regular HTML styling, right? That's called inline styling.
Yeah.
That's a no-go in JSX. In JSX, you have to put it inside these double curly bars. And notice how there's no units of measurement here. Okay, px is the default unit of measurement. Okay, so if you want to make it a percentage, you have to specify that. Okay, so you have to do like this. Now we have it as a percentage. Okay.
Or you can't just put the percent in.
Yeah, because it's a variable. So
Okay.
this is probably the biggest source of the crashes in JSX, styling stuff like this. Okay, so one more nuance of JSX styling is, let's say we have here, instead of height, we have min height, right? In HTML, it looks like that. That's how you do it. This will not work in JSX. Okay, you have to go camel case on this. So you have to go like this, like that. Okay? So there's all these little things you got to remember. So the more inline styling you have, the more of this nonsense you're going to have to catch. Okay?
And you couldn't even do that in SAS either because you need to do it before it gets to the client side, right?
It'll
Yeah.
break in a million different spots. So
Right.
yeah, you have to do it like this.
If you have multiple style attributes, do you separate them by commas or?
Oh yes, it's a JSON object, right? So
okay,
let's say
it's normal.
Yep. color, red,
Yeah.
standard JSX styling. Okay, I'll tell you right now, this will be your biggest source of crashes. Okay, number 2 is going to be on close tags. It'll always be that, and then typos, spelling errors. So by far, that'll account for 98% of your mistakes. I promise you that. So it'll be this, on close tags, typos, things of that sort. Like I said, JSX is much less forgiving than regular HTML. So in regular HTML, you can make small mistakes all day, it'll still render. You can't make a single small mistake in JSX, not even one. So you have to catch all these things. So here, okay, so here again we have our map. Now, the only thing I didn't explain is onReady callback. This is a callback that Google Maps will call, or the React Google Maps component, after the map loads, right? And it'll give you a map reference argument right here. Now, what you want to do with it, you can ignore it, but you really don't want to do that. What you really want to do is you want to bind that map reference to the state so that later on you can use it. Like if the user moves the map around, you want to know about that. If the user clicks on the map, you want to know about that. All those callbacks will happen to the state reference right here. So you have a reference to it. Basically, what React Google Maps is saying here is saying, here's the map that you're using. Do whatever you want with it, or nothing. But why would you do nothing, right? Here it is. So it's on you as a developer to bind that reference to the state, which we're doing in line 25, so that you have a reference to it later on when I want to know if the map moved, the zoom level changed, the user clicked on a marker, etc. Okay, that's what's going on here. Okay, and this is pretty obvious, right? Zoom level, center. Right. So if I set the zoom level to 8, smaller means further out. So we're moving further out now. So it gives you the whole tri-state area. So 14 is street level. Whoops, I think I did 4, so right. 14. Right. Okay, and you can move it around. That's why I said the actual height you assign doesn't really matter. You can make it 2,000. It doesn't matter because the user is going to see this portion no matter what. So it's sort of a a trivial thing to remember. So what I'm going to do to make your life a little bit easier is put all this in the Slack channel, or if you want to type it out, it's up to you. You can just do that, and then render it and confirm that it worked. Okay. So like I said, this is my map sort of kind of like a superclass, really. Like it's like, and I do all the nitty gritty inside the Google Maps.
Where did that go on your personal one or this channel?
Oh yeah, my apologies.
Thanks.
I do encourage you when you go home to look at the actual implementation. It's not really that complicated. The only thing I did not want to get into was the whole concept of higher order components. So that's the reason why I did this. And then same as always, put this guy back inside, proper indentation. Okay, and we're going to do one last thing and then break for lunch, and then we'll pick it up from there.
So put in the sidebar wrapper, right?
Yes, just like this.
Google is not.
Okay, and then make sure this is rendering on the sidebar the way you expect it to.
Using events.js, right?
I'm sorry?
I'm getting an error from like events.js. We're gonna use our map probably.
All right, so now we want to add a few markers on the map,
Yeah, things have changed.
just so that we can have a corresponding UI on the map as we have on the main panel, where we have 4 items for sale, so we should have 4 markers on the map, right? So what we want to do, the map component that I wrote takes a markers property as well, right? And inside there, you just insert an array of markers, right? So over here, we're going to create a markers array, like that. It's just an array. And then we have to populate it with a series of markers with a certain JSON format, because it's a Google Maps integration, right? So it has its own like structure that you have to maintain. Okay? So inside the array, the marker has to look like this. We'll remove the icon because we don't really need that.
We'll just use like a default icon.
Yeah, the red circle thing.
Yeah.
So here's the JSON structure that you need to conform to the Google Maps requirements. Okay.
Can you pop that in Slack?
Oh yeah, sorry, that's a good idea. So,
That'd be safer. That's how Google Maps expects.
yes, correct. So it's a Google Maps requirement. So. Clearly, the important elements are position and label, right? I think we can make sense out of that.
Yes.
Okay, so we have a markers array that we then pass in to our map component right here, which is expecting an array of markers. Good? Okay, and again, I would imagine the actual attributes are pretty self-explanatory: position and label.
Right.
So let's go ahead and render that, and let's make sure nothing broke. And there's my marker. You see that?
Are you getting this warning for? I mean, it works for me, but in your console, do you get this invalid prop title?
Oh, yeah, let's find that.
Yeah, I
Marker
got that.
expected string. Title of type number. So evidently they expect not they expected string. So let's go with key is string. That was it. So the error said we expected a string, but you provided a number, so I
Yeah.
converted it to a string.
Cool.
It works.
Can we go back and see the first
That makes sense because the key is a unique identifier, not a numerical identifier. Stupid mistake.
It said some error about title though that I don't know how. Maybe it was-
Yeah, I didn't really make sense out of that. What I tried to figure out here is what is the only key that's comparable to title.
Yeah,
Well, the label's already a string. It can't be that.
yeah.
It's already a string, so I just guessed on key.
Got it. I thought I wanted another thing called title or something, but yes.
So my initial impulse was, did I put a number here by mistake? I didn't. Right, it's a string,
Yeah.
which meant like, what are my only other options? Either key or ID. I flipped a coin and I won. So that's it. Are we good? Okay, so if we put in one more, just to make sure it works on multiple items, right? So put a comma here, and then tweak the lat and long very subtly. So like 40.70, right? That'll move it to the left by a couple points, and make sure we see two markers. Oh, same key. All right, so here we have duplicate keys, right? So we need 2 and 2 because it's a different item. And there are our two markers. Good?
So you just changed the
I just tweaked the number a little bit.
position.
You want to go to the 100th place because anything higher than that you won't even see it. Bless you.
Can I see your code?
Let's find out. Maybe I made it too close to the.
Bless you. If I do that, maybe that'll make it a little bit closer. Yeah, right next to each other. Okay, and before we break for lunch, I want to do one last thing. Oh, let's confirm that this is all working. Is everyone have this working?
I think I just got my. What'd you say? Hundredths place for the extra dot.
Yeah, like 0.01 deltas are close enough so that you can still see both markers.
7, 7.
For one, you can just leave it the same.
Okay, I see. Okay.
Okay. And just to make sure, because we've been running all this local, right? So go back here to your terminal. Let's run a npm run build. This is a production build, so the build script is automatically production grade. So you see how when you load the project, right, you see how this is orange? That means you're running a development build. That's actually a bad thing. You want to run the production build, right?
Yeah.
So it's running through all the scripts right now, doing all the minification, compiling all the assets.
npm run build.
Correct, yep. And then run the dev server, make sure the production build runs successfully. And you see how this turns to blue now? That's what you want to see. That's the production build running,
The
okay?
React part of it is-
Correct, right there.
I got blue.
Now that you've confirmed the production build is successful, let's deploy it. Because obviously, if it doesn't work on live, none of this matters. So let's get this thrown up onto staging, confirm it works, and break for lunch.
So that's the command, deploy to,
Turbo deploy.
okay,
It says deploy to Vertex, and then is it done or is it?
No, it takes a while.
Okay.
It actually runs the build again.
Alright.
I put this in here because a couple people requested that I prevent anything other than the production build going on. So that's
Okay.
what it's doing right now.
Yeah, like in another window or something. Yeah.
Yep.
I actually have. I saw Webpack running in another window. Is that okay if it's running while I'm doing this stuff?
Yeah, it's fine. I mean, turn it off, but it's not really a problem. It won't be a problem.
my turbo deploy, it's just turbo deploy, right?
That's it. It takes about 2 minutes. It's got to run the build. It's upload all the
Are we
files.
doing it at the root level of that?
Correct.
domain?
Correct. So my deploy just completed, so about 1 to 2 minutes. And then head over to the staging link and just make sure everything works on staging, which it does, which means we're good to go. And take note that it's running the production build, okay?
So it doesn't deploy to a different URL for production, or is it the same as? Oh, it just deploys to staging.
Yeah, staging, right.
All right.
But this is a live link, so you can hook this up to a DNS and it'll
Yeah.
work.
We use Jenkins to do our build processes. but-
Yeah, I got a couple requests for stuff like that, especially like continuous integration. I'm not going to get to that
Yeah.
until like I have enough critical mass of users.
But this is awesome for local dev that it sets up that staging for you, so you can kind of like see how it works on the internet versus like your local environment.
Yeah.
Before you like give it to QA or whatever.
Right. What you're dealing with Turbo is like the result of thousands of hours of me banging my head, saying like, why doesn't this work? Why doesn't this work? Like, it's just the evolution of that. So like,
Yeah.
I was trying to hit as many of my own personal pain points as I could.
Sure.
So it should feel easy for you. Like it
But
should
that's
feel
cool
easy.
because sometimes I don't even like to use local host. I like to use like a real website to develop,
Right.
and this is like a real website, and
It is
I
really,
can-
yeah. You
yeah,
can just
yeah.
link to it.
kick out some of the bugs, before I send it to staging or whatever.
That's what I would do in your specific situation. I would iterate on Turbo,
Yeah.
just make sure everything works, and then send it over to your production team
Yeah.
or whoever manages all that.
Yeah, we have a bunch of different ones, so.
Right.
So for me, it says you must be an admin or collaborator to deploy this project.
I'm sorry, what?
You must be an admin,
So you want to do Turbo login. So Turbo space login.
which, okay, I did it once.
Does he need sudo or something?
Maybe because you
So after I deploy,
you like you need
everything
to like a new directory.
but
and you
before I
just
deploy,
go.
when I'm in local,
I'm in the
Oh wait, hold on. Krishna, I forgot. It's because you're running my project. I forgot. You
Yeah.
downloaded my source code. So you want to go back to your root and do Turbo app and then your app ID. And it'll switch it over to your app ID.
So I would do, oh, I see what you're saying. I have to go back.
Right, because you downloaded my project. But my app ID is fixed to your project right now.
Right, makes sense.
So it's blocking you from deploying because it's my environment. So what you want to do is connect it to your app ID.
Got it. Oh, it's good one.
And then the deploy should go through. Okay. Okay, so it's worked on staging. So the next thing we want to do when we get back from lunch is hook it up to a Redux architecture get all the data synced up through the Redux store. That'll pretty much be the rest of the afternoon, and then tomorrow we'll hook it up with an actual backend, get some actual data in there, and create some real user interactivity. Okay, so we want to call it 2:30. We'll meet back here. Matt will be at the front door at 2:25. So,
Alright.
and then we'll just let everyone back up. Okay.